This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and here we are with another skinny Sony Vaio product. This is their first Ultrabook, the first one that they're actually calling an Ultrabook. Let's face it, they've been making Ultrabooks since before that word existed. But anyway, this is the Sony Vaio T. Again, very thin, very light, very metal. You can get it in black too, for those of you who think this is a little bit shiny. Nice looking notebook, sturdy, Ivy bridge. We're going to look at it now. So here's the Sony Vaio T. This is the highest end model right here. We're going to go through all the variations of what you can order in a minute, but you can see, again, really beautiful. It's a brushed aluminum look, and yeah, it really is metal. It feels sturdy. It kind of reminds me of the Dell XPS 13 in that way, in terms of it's sturdy machine. It's got the lines that are very similar to the Sony Vaio Z that we looked at recently, the third generation. No rounded corners, all kind of angular and modern, no teardrop shape either, so we're not talking about MacBook Air clone here. You can see that we've got a USB 3.0 sleep and charge port here, another USB port, your fan grills, there's your power right there, and on the back the super shiny Vaio cap. Now this again is similar to the Sony Vaio Z, but that one has either a brushed aluminum cap or a black cap, so this guy is a lot shinier. And you can see the little rubber feet that stick out, and that's to actually prop up the display at a better angle for typing. Here we have our gigabit Ethernet port, VGA, full-size VGA port. They managed to fit it in, though this is a very slim device, obviously. Full-size HDMI, SD card slot with a card in there right now, so you can see it fits pretty flush. And our headphone jack. On the front edge, we have indicators for wireless, hard drive activity, and charging activity. And on the bottom here, again, just like the Z2 and Z3, you've got the battery, which isn't one of those you release a latch and get out really easily, but you use something like a nickel or a button, whatever you've got, because this is a wide slot, and you can unscrew these three screws and then pop the battery out. So not exactly easy swap battery, but it is much more possible to remove this than most Ultrabooks that require some dismantling to actually get to the battery. And that's a 4025 milliamp battery. And they promise around 7 hours of runtime with this. That's what Sony claims. Real life, so far we're seeing about 5 3/4 hours with our Core i7 model. Got fan grills here, and you'll notice this panel here, after you pop out the battery, there's some more screws, and then you can take this off and you can upgrade the RAM. Again, that's very unusual for an Ultrabook. Usually everything is sealed inside, soldered on the motherboard. This has 4 gigs of RAM soldered on the motherboard, and you have one RAM slot available, so you can bring it all the way up to 8 gigs. Pretty cool. And now I'll take a look inside. Don't worry about that little squeak sound that you just heard. That's just those little rubber feet rubbing on our board over here so it can prop the keyboard up. And you saw how fast that woke from sleep, just like that, instant. That's because this one is a high-end model, is a 128 gig SSD, an Intel Core i7 ULV ultra-low voltage processor, the kind used in Ultrabooks, lower power than full mobile CPUs like used in the Sony Vaio Z3. And it's clocked at 1.9 gigahertz, and it has turbo boost. You can also get it with the Core i5 ULV, and there's a variety of hard drive options, 500 gig hard drive, spinning hard drive, but all of them have a 32 gig MLC NAND flash hybrid drive, so the stuff that's being used most often is in flash memory, so it still makes for those really fast resume times, awake from hibernation, all that kind of thing, because that's an Intel requirement that you have some sort of flash memory there for the operating system itself, so it can, well, do those things like wake up really fast. You can hear the fan maybe just a little bit right now, and that to me is a bit of a mystery. It's not really doing very much, is it? And it does do that every so often. It just kind of comes on like maintenance mode there to keep the CPU cool. No, it's not running very hot according to Core Temp measuring the actual CPU, but it's a funny thing that the Vaio Z3, which has a much more powerful CPU and an even thinner case, actually you won't really hear the fan just sitting here not doing anything. But it's not an offensive, whiny kind of sound. It's not roaring, anything like that. Just something to note that it will not be completely silent just sitting there doing nothing. What's really shocking is the starting price on this. Sony products tend to be expensive, right? They may be nicer than the average product, but you're going to pay for it. This starts at just $769, and you get the Core i5 and the MLC assisted hard drive for that price, and 4 gigs of RAM. Not a bad deal. 1366 by 768 display on all of them. That is the only resolution option, and it's a good one for readability. And you can see that this is a pretty nice display. Color saturation is very good. There's not too much glare. It is a gloss. I would call it a not super glossy display. It's not like most Ultrabooks that are absolute mirrors, say particularly my Dell XPS 13. Boy, is that a mirror. It makes it a little hard to see in any kind of bright lighting whatsoever. So Sony did a nice job with that, and it's also quite bright. Nice display there for the price. Metal construction, regardless of which one you get, so even if you get the $769 one, you're getting a solid notebook. And for that price, the hard drive capacity is 320 gigs. If you go up to $799, 30 bucks more, you can get a 500 gig hard drive, again with that 32 gig MLC NAND hybrid drive design. And there are 128 gig SSD, 256, and even 512 if you build to order, but the 512 gig SSD is absurdly expensive, so I don't think that most of you are going to be putting that onto something like this. We're talking like something like $1,000 or so. But it's a single SSD module. It's not the the RAID design that's used in the Z3, just your normal single SSD configuration. And this model that we have here has 128 gig SSD, the Core i7 1.9 gigahertz, 6 gigs of RAM, and it sells for $11.99. The notebook has a very large trackpad. You can see it's a buttonless design, and though it's really big and roomy, I'm not finding I like it a whole lot more than the Z3 trackpad, to be honest. It's reasonably good for multi-touch gestures and that kind of thing, but better than the average Windows notebook, I would say. Not amazing in its capabilities, but nice and roomy. Makes a tactile click. And the keyboard is Sony's usual chiclet style, very large, nicely spaced, and that way it's a type of stream, but as you'd imagine for something that's fairly thin, you're not getting a whole lot of key travel here. It's not going to compete with the Lenovo ThinkPad designs or the Dell XPS 13 there. Those are the true type of streams, but you know what, this one is pretty good, and it's certainly a lot better than the Asus ZenBook UX31E, which has a super low travel keyboard, and some of the other competing Ultrabooks out there, just, you know, keyboard was obviously not the priority in the design, so reasonably nice for typing, but you're not going to have a whole lot of key travel for those of you who care about that. Big bummer here, not backlit. Nice thing here is the separated arrow keys. You do have to hit the FN key to switch to the page up and down functionality. Usual strip of FN keys up here, and we've got the usual Sony buttons up here. So these are actual clicky buttons, not the capacitive ones like on the Z3, but they do the same thing. You've got Assist, which brings up Vaio Care. You can use that to fix up your computer, download driver updates, make recovery disks, that kind of thing. The Web button, which will boot up the computer and run the web browser lickety-split, and the Vaio button, which is something that you can assign to whatever application that you like. And here's our nice glowing power button over here. So whether you get the Core i5 clocked at 1.7 gigahertz with available turbo boost, or the i7 with 1.9 gigahertz, you've got Ivy Bridge inside. And Ivy Bridge is a nice improvement, maybe 8% improvement in processing speed, nothing huge over Sandy Ridge, but you get Intel HD 4000 graphics, and that is significant improvement in graphics. That means things like Photoshop is going to run quicker, your web browser, even whenever it's rendering graphics, for example, and gaming becomes somewhat possible. Now, this is still a ULV CPU. This is not like the bright and shining star among notebooks. Ultrabooks just aren't that. But for some moderate gaming, certainly with casual titles, you're there now with Intel HD 4000 graphics. And if you really want to push it, you could probably run Skyrim, say, at pretty modest resolutions, the lowest end of what we're talking about, with effects turned off, and get 30 FIPS there for sure. Machine benchmarks at 12,000 on PC Mark Vantage. That's very good. That's really brought up a lot by the SSD drive. SSD drives heavily influence PC Mark Vantage, so that doesn't mean it's as fast as the Sony Vaio S, for example, running a full mobile CPU. On 3D Mark Vantage, it scored almost 3100, and that is really impressive. That's better than some dedicated lower to mid-range GPUs that we've seen a couple of years ago in notebooks, and as recently as even a year ago, in fact. So that shows you the improvement that's been made in graphics, and that's about double what we see on Sandy Bridge Ultrabooks. So a lot of nice performance boosts going on there. Experientially, it feels quick and responsive. It can certainly handle any kind of video that you throw out, including 1080p in case you want to use that HDMI out. Streaming YouTube, Netflix, all that kind of good stuff, yep. Even Photoshop, say if you're working with 20 meg RAW files or lesser, it's going to handle it pretty well. You might notice it's going to take you a little bit longer if you had some very powerful 15.6-inch notebook or the Sony Vaio Z3, super powerhouse, ultra portable, but beyond that, yeah, it can handle anything. Certainly MS Office, web, email, video playback, streaming, that kind of stuff. It's there for you. We've got a 720p webcam up here with microphone that uses Sony's Exmor sensor, so it's better at low light than your average webcam on a notebook computer. And overall, you get a lot of ports compared to Ultrabooks, which are often ports constrained. I'm particularly impressed with the fact that it has an Ethernet jack built in. One thing that's strange is this uses Intel HD 4000 graphics. That's not the strange part, but it should have Intel WiDi. That requires an Intel GPU on there, and it's not preloaded on here. I haven't tried downloading and installing it manually to see if it would work, but odd that that is not listed in the spec sheet and not included on here. It should certainly work for those of you who want to use wireless display. And for our full review, we'll test that out and let you know what happens with that. The machine weighs 3.4 pounds. The Ultrabook averages somewhere around 3 to 3.1 pounds, so it's actually a little bit heavier. Probably all that metal there and things like the actual removable battery and the accessible RAM slot, those things actually add weight to the product, and that's probably why. It's funny to think that this is actually a pound heavier than the Sony Vaio Z3. And speaking of the Z3, we'll do a little comparison so you can see them together. So here we have the Vaio Z3 in black, on top of it, carbon fiber finish. Now this guy costs considerably more and is a much faster machine. It has a full Core i7 mobile CPU, also Ivy Bridge, a 1080p display. So you're talking a lot more stuff here, but this guy starts at $1,600 also, so it's a lot more expensive. But those of you who need a lot more horsepower, obviously the Z3 would be the kind of machine to choose, but for just everyday computing work where you can just use an Ultrabook no problem, then the Sony Vaio T makes a lot of sense. Certainly a lot of similarity in design. They've got the same keyboard layout, they've got the same assist buttons, only they're capacitive on the Z3 over here. And the Z3 has that angular design too. And you can see the lids on both of them. And the Z3 is just a little bit smaller. And we'll have a smackdown between these two guys in case you're having trouble deciding which one makes more sense for you. And next, while we're comparing Ultrabooks and metal to metal, this is the Dell XPS 13 here. This is about the smallest footprint of any Windows Ultrabook on the market. Obviously a metal lid as well. Dell's carbon fiber on the bottom instead of being metal on the bottom. Smaller footprint. Dell tapers a bit so it looks thinner at the front, but if you take them to the side view, by the time you reach the back edge, they're just getting close, but the Vaio is actually still thicker. And here we have them open, and you can see the Dell has a black soft touch finish here. It feels really nice to rest your hands on. And for an Ultrabook, really an amazing keyboard with really good key travel. So I still give the edge to the Dell for the keyboard, but the Sony isn't too bad. Now for display, I give the Sony definite merit. The Dell has a Gorilla Glass display, great for durability, but bad for glare, and it doesn't get as bright. They both have TN panels, but the viewing angle is wider on the Sony. You don't have to move it until you get exactly right to find that sweet spot, which you have to do with the Dell. Definitely the Sony has reasonably good viewing angles for a mid-price notebook. And now we're going to test out 1080p video playback. This is a 1080p high-profile movie trailer that we have stored on an SD card. So high quality, and you can hear the speakers, which are reasonably good for an Ultrabook. I wouldn't say they're among the best, though. The Dell certainly has some of the richest, fullest, loudest speakers I've ever heard, but this is less tinny than the more expensive Sony Vaio Z3.
In flight of bagging. Turbo, allow me to introduce Phoebe, Oil, Garland, Barlin,
So we heard the fan running a bit there. Again, that's the one thing that I have to say, if you're bothered by hearing the fan, then, well, this one is going to come on. Not whining, not super duper loud, but you'll hear it. It does not get terribly hot to the touch, despite the metal frame. It stays comfortable everywhere, and even on the bottom, it's not too unbearably hot. If you've been doing something pretty intense, like playing a game, say, or playing video for half an hour, it gets a little toasty on the bottom. You probably don't want to keep it against your leg if you can help it. In terms of software, we've got the usual VaioGate bundle up here. You can see this bounces around. You can play with it with your mouse and make it hop around if you're silly like me. And we've got the Welcome to VaioGate. So here we are back to normal mode. You can see we've got shortcuts to the Sony Media Gallery, their collaboration apps, VaioCare Play Memories Home is on here. Music Unlimited service, VaioCare Skype, Internet Explorer, anti-theft tools, and the webcam companion. And that's about it. It's not too loaded up with bloatware. You get the usual Office 2010 Starter Edition on here. You can enter your product key and turn it into a full version, or just use it as Starter Edition with Word and Excel. All of our VaioCare tools, Vaio Control Center, all that stuff you're used to if you're a Vaio owner. And if you're not, well, they're pretty useful utilities to maintain your computer. And we don't have any of the fancy video and sound editing stuff that we see on higher-end Vaios like the Vaio S and the Vaio Z. So there's no Sony Vegas here, there's no SoundForge or that kind of thing. So pretty clean overall, and with our 128 gig SSD, you can see, other than benchmarking software and running the Office Starter Edition, we were down to 62 gigs of space here on a 128 gig SSD, so that's about what you can expect out of the box. You install your Office suite and maybe one or two smaller applications. It also comes with Kaspersky Antivirus 2012 30-day edition, which you can turn into a commercial edition if you want to pay some money, or you can load the antivirus software of your choice. So that's the Sony Vaio T Ultrabook, Sony's first official Ultrabook, and it's very nice. And like I said, that was a very pleasant surprise when it starts out at only $769 instead of being an expensive product. So it's affordable. It has a better than average display among Ultrabooks, a nice metal casing and construction on it. Feels pretty sturdy. It's fairly thin. It's reasonably light though. Certainly it's not among the lightest of Ultrabooks. Decent keyboard, key travel not so good, but everything else about it is good, kind of makes up for that key travel issue. Wish it was backlit though. But performance is pretty good on this thanks to Ivy Bridge and Intel HD 4000 graphics, certainly faster than the Sandy Bridge Ultrabooks that are on the market. That's the outgoing version of Ultrabooks that you'll find on the shelf. And overall, I like it. Nice set of ports on here, 2 USB ports, Ethernet, full-size HDMI. Not bad for the price. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Visit our website for the full review of the Sony Vaio T Ultrabook.